Prince Camaralzaman and Princess Badoura. Some 20 days' sail from the coast of Persia lies the Isle of the Children of Khaledan. The island is divided into several provinces, each of which are large flourishing towns, and the whole forms an important kingdom. It was governed in former days by a king named Shah-Zaman, who with good right considered himself one of the most peaceful, prosperous, and fortunate monarchs on the earth. In fact, he had but one grievance: he had no heir. This distressed him so greatly that one day he confided his grief to the Grand Vizier, who, being a wise counsellor, said, "Such matters are indeed beyond human aid. Allah alone can grant your desire, and I should advise you, sire, to send large gifts to those holy men who spend their lives in prayer, and to beg for their intercessions. Who knows whether their petitions may not be answered?" The king took the vizier's advice, and the result of so many prayers for an heir to the throne was that a son was born to him the following year. Shah-Zaman sent noble gifts as thank offerings to all the mosques and religious houses, and great rejoicings were celebrated in honour of the birth of the little prince, who was so beautiful that he was named Camaralzaman, or Moon of the Century. Prince Camaralzaman was brought up with extreme care by an excellent governor and all the cleverest teachers, and he had done such credit to them that a more charming and accomplished young man was not to be found. While he was still a youth, the king, who loved him dearly, had some thoughts of abdicating in his favour. As usual, he talked over his plans with his Grand Vizier, who, though he did not approve the idea, would not state all his objections. "Sire," he replied, "the prince is still very young for the cares of state. Your Majesty fears his growing idle and careless, and doubtless you are right. But how would it be if he were first to marry? This would attach him to his home, and your Majesty might give him a share in your council, so that he may gradually learn how to wear a crown, which you can give up to him whenever you find him capable of wearing it." The vizier's advice once more struck the king as being good, and he sent for his son, who lost no time in obeying the summons, and standing respectfully with downcast eyes before the king, asked for his commands. "I have sent for you," said the king, "to say that I wish you to marry. What do you think about it?" The prince was so much overcome by these words that he remained silent for some time. At length he said, "Sire, I beg you to pardon me if I am unable to reply as you wish. I certainly did not expect such a proposal, as I am still so young, and I confess that the idea of marrying is distasteful to me. Possibly I may not always be in this mind, but I feel it will require some time to induce me to take the step which your Majesty desires." This answer greatly distressed the king, who was sincerely grieved by his son's objection to marriage. However, he would not have recourse to extreme measures, so he said, "I do not wish to force you. I will give you time to reflect. But remember that such a step is necessary for a prince such as you, who will one day be called to rule over a great kingdom." From this time, Prince Camaralzaman was admitted to the royal council, and the king showed him every mark of favour. At the end of a year, the king took his son aside and said, "Well, my son, have you changed your mind on the subject of marriage, or do you still refuse to obey my wish?" The prince was less surprised, but no less firm than on the former occasion, and begged his father not to press the subject, adding that it was quite useless to urge him any longer. This answer much distressed the king, who again confided his trouble to his vizier. "I have followed your advice," he said, "but Camaralzaman declines to marry and is more obstinate than ever." "Sire," replied the vizier, "much is gained by patience, and your Majesty might regret any violence. Why not wait another year, and then inform the prince in the midst of the assembled council that the good of the state demands his marriage. He cannot possibly refuse again before so distinguished an assemblage, and in your immediate presence." The Sultan ardently desired to see his son married at once, but he yielded to the vizier's arguments and decided to wait. He then visited the prince's mother, and after telling her of his disappointment and of the further respite he had given his son, he added, "I know that Camaralzaman confides more in you than he does in me. Pray speak very seriously to him on this subject, and make him realize that he will most seriously displease me if he remains obstinate. and that he will certainly regret the measures I shall be obliged to take to enforce my will." So the next time the Sultana Fatima saw her son, she told him she had heard of his refusal to marry, adding how distressed she felt that he should have vexed his father so much. She asked what reasons he could have for his objections to obey. "Madame," replied the prince, "I make no doubt that there are many good, virtuous, sweet, and amiable women as there are others as much the reverse. Would that all were like you. But what revolts me is the idea of marrying a woman without knowing anything at all about her. My father will ask the hand of the daughter of some neighbouring sovereign, who will give his consent to our union. Be she fair or frightful, clever or stupid, good or bad, I must marry her, and am left in no choice in the matter. How am I to know that she will not be proud, passionate, contemptuous, and recklessly extravagant, or that her disposition will in any way suit mine?" "But my son," urged Fatima, "you surely do not wish to be the last of a race which has reigned so long and so gloriously over this kingdom." "Madame," replied the prince, "I have no wish to survive the king, my father, but should I do so, I will try to reign in such a manner as may be considered worthy of my predecessors." These and similar conversations proved to the Sultan how useless it was to argue with his son, and the year elapsed without bringing any change in the prince's ideas. At length the day came when the Sultan summoned him before the council, and there informed him that not only his own wishes but the good of the empire demanded his marriage, and desired him to give his answer before the assembled ministers. At this, Camaralzaman grew so angry and spoke with so much heat that the king, naturally irritated at being opposed by his son in full council, ordered the prince to be arrested and locked up in an old tower, where he had nothing but very little furniture, a few books, and a single slave to wait on him. Camaralzaman, pleased to be free to enjoy his books, showed himself very indifferent to his sentence. When night came, he washed himself, performed his devotions, and, having read some pages of the Quran, lay down on a couch without putting out the light near him, and was soon asleep. Now there was a deep well in the tower in which Prince Camaralzaman was imprisoned, and this well was a favourite resort of the fairy Mamun, daughter of Damriat, chief of a legion of genii. Toward midnight, Mamun floated lightly up from the well, intending, according to her usual habit, to roam about the upper world as curiosity or accident might prompt. The light in the prince's room surprised her, and without disturbing the slave who slept across the threshold, she entered the room, and approaching the bed, was still more astonished to find it occupied. The prince lay with his face half hidden by the coverlet. Mamun lifted it a little, and beheld the most beautiful youth she had ever seen. "What a marvel of beauty he must be when his eyes are open," she thought. "What can he have done to deserve to be treated like this?" She could not weary of gazing at Camaralzaman, but at length, having softly kissed his brow, she replaced the coverlet and resumed her flight through the air. As she entered the middle region, she heard the sound of great wings coming toward her, and shortly met one of the race of bad genii. This genie, whose name was Danhash, recognized Mamun with terror, for he knew the supremacy which her goodness gave her over him. He would gladly have avoided her altogether, but they were so near he must either be prepared to fight or yield to her, so he addressed her at once in a conciliatory tone. "Good Mamun, swear to me by Allah you will do me no harm, and on my side I will promise not to injure you." "Accursed genie," replied Mamun, "what harm can you do me? But I will grant your power and give the promise you ask. And now tell me what you have seen and done tonight." "Fair lady," said Danhash, "you meet me at the right moment to hear something really interesting. I must tell you that I come from the farthest end of China, which is one of the largest and most powerful kingdoms in the world. The present king has only one daughter, who is so lovely that neither you, nor I, nor any other creature could find adequate terms in which to describe her marvellous charms. You must therefore picture to yourself the most perfect features, a brilliant and delicate complexion, an enchanting expression, and even then, imagination will fall short of the reality. The king, her father, has carefully shielded this treasure from vulgar gaze, and has taken every precaution to keep her from the sight of everyone except the happy mortal he may choose to be her husband. But in order to give her variety in her seclusion, he has built her 7 palaces, such as never have been seen before. They are all most sumptuously furnished, while the gardens surrounding them are laid out with exquisite taste. In fact, neither trouble nor cost has been spared to make this retreat agreeable to the princess. The report of her wonderful beauty has spread far and wide, and many powerful kings have sent embassies to ask her hand in marriage. The king has always received these embassies graciously, but he says he will never oblige the princess to marry against her will, and, as she regularly declines each fresh proposal, the envoys have had to leave as disappointed in the result of their missions as they were gratified by the magnificent receptions. "Sire," said the princess to her father, "you wish me to marry, and I know you desire to please me, for which I am grateful. But indeed I have no inclination to change my state, for where could I find so happy a life amid so many beautiful and delightful surroundings? I feel I could never be as happy with any husband as I am here, and I beg you not to press me to marry." At last an embassy came from a king so rich and powerful that the King of China felt constrained to urge this suit upon his daughter. He told her how important such an alliance would be, and pressed her to consent. In fact, he pressed her so persistently that the princess at length lost her temper and quite forgot the respect due to her father. "Sire," she cried angrily, "do not speak further of this or any other marriage, or I will plunge this dagger in my heart and so escape from all these inopportunities." The King of China was extremely indignant with his daughter and replied, "You have lost your senses, and you must be treated accordingly." So he had her confined in one set of rooms in one of her palaces, and only allowed her 10 old women, of whom her nurse was the head, to wait on her and keep her company. He next sent letters to all the kings who had sued for the princess's hand, begging they would think of her no longer as she was insane, and he desired his various envoys to make it known that anyone who could cure her should have her to wife. "Fair Mamoon," continued Danhasch, "this is the present state of affairs. I never pass a day without going to gaze on this incomparable beauty, and I'm sure that if you would only accompany me, you would think the sight well worth the trouble, and own that you never saw such loveliness before." The fairy only answered with a peal of laughter, and when at length she had control of her voice, she cried, "Oh, come, you really are making game of me. I thought you had something really interesting to tell me instead of raving about some unknown damsel. What would you say if you could see a prince whose beauty was really transcendent? That is something worth talking about. You would certainly lose your head." "Charming Mamoon," asked Danhasch, "may I inquire, who is the prince of whom you speak?" "Know," replied Mamoon, "that he is in much the same case as your princess. The king, his father, wanted to force him to marry, and on the prince's refusal to obey, he has been imprisoned in an old tower where I have just seen him." "I don't like to contradict a lady," said Danhasch, "but you must really permit me to doubt any mortal being as beautiful as my princess. The best plan is to test the truth of what I say. The best plan to test the truth of what I say will be for you to let me take you to the princess and see for yourself." "There is no need for that," retorted Mamoon. "We can satisfy ourselves in another way. Bring your princess here and lay her down beside my prince. We can then compare them at leisure and decide which is in the right." Danhasch readily consented, and after having the tower where the prince was confined pointed out to him, and making a wager with Mamoon as to the result of the comparison, he flew off to China to fetch the princess. In an incredibly short time, Danhasch returned, bearing the sleeping princess. Mamoon led him to the prince's room, and the rival beauty was placed beside him. When the prince and the princess lay thus side by side, an animated dispute as to their respective charms arose between the fairy and the genie. Danhasch began by saying, "Now you see that my princess is far more beautiful than your prince. Can you doubt any longer?" "Doubt? Of course I do," exclaimed Mamoon. "Why, you must be blind not to see how much my prince excels your princess. I do not deny that she is very handsome, but only look, and you must own that I am in the right." "There is no need for me to look longer," said Danhasch. "My first impression will remain the same. But of course, charming Mamoon, I am ready to yield to you if you insist on it." By no means, replied Mamoun. I have no idea of being under any obligation to an accursed genie like you. I refer the matter to an umpire and shall expect you to submit to his verdict. Danhasch readily agreed, and on Mamoun striking the floor with her foot, it opened, and a hideous, lame, squinting genie with 6 horns on his head and hands like claws emerged. As soon as he beheld Mamoun, he threw himself at her feet and asked her commands. Rise, Cash, she said. I summoned you to judge between me and Danhasch. Glance at that couch and say without any partiality whether you think the youth or the maiden lying there is more beautiful. Cash looked at the prince and princess with every token of surprise and admiration. At length, having gazed long and without being able to come to a decision, he said, Madame, I must confess that I should deceive you were I to declare one to be handsomer than the other. There seems to be only one way in which to decide the matter, and that is to wake one after the other and judge which one of them expresses the greater admiration for the other. And we'll pick it up again tomorrow night.